I remember the exact moment I lost everything. It wasn't in a boardroom with a judge slamming down a gavel. It wasn't in a bank office, with cold eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses telling me I'd defaulted. No. It happened in my own kitchen, the same place where she used to hum old jazz tunes while scrambling eggs, barefoot in one of my oversized shirts. She wasn't humming that morning. She just stood there, across the counter, eyes on the papers in front of her. Her nails tapped on the granite surface, slow and deliberate, like a countdown I didn't understand yet. I handed her the pen. "Once this is done," I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes, "you'll officially own it all. The house. The company shares. Everything." She looked up and held my gaze. There was a flicker, something cold, something unreadable, before she leaned in and pressed a kiss on my cheek. "For us," she whispered. I believed her. God help me, I believed her. "My name's Nathan Blake. I used to be the CEO of a chain of luxury real estate ventures. At my peak, I was worth 8 figures, had offices in 6 cities, and a schedule booked out 6 months in advance. People returned my calls within 5 minutes or they were replaced. But what no one tells you when you build an empire is how fragile it all really is. One bad deal. One legal misstep. One turn of the economy, and the sandcastle starts to crack. By the time I realized how much trouble I was in, it was too late. I was staring down bankruptcy. The IRS had flagged irregularities, not illegal things, just messy bookkeeping. Investors were backing out. Partners were turning their phones off. And every time I walked into my office, I could feel the walls breathing, like they knew I was no longer welcome. There was only one person left I could trust. My wife, Amelia. We'd been together for 12 years. Married for 8. She stood by me when I was clawing my way up, back when I still drove a 2004 Civic and split rent with a roommate. She was with me the day I closed my first major deal, popping champagne in a studio apartment with no furniture but a mattress on the floor and a half-eaten pizza on the counter. She wasn't just my wife, she was my anchor. So when my lawyers advised me to move my assets temporarily, I didn't hesitate. "Put it all in Amelia's name," I said. "She's the only person I'd trust with my life." And I did trust her. With my money, my reputation, my heart. I thought that would be enough. "You're sure about this?" my attorney had asked, brows furrowed as he slid the papers across the table. "It's temporary," I said. "She understands the risks." He looked like he wanted to say something else. But he didn't. Maybe he should have. That night, after she signed, Amelia made pasta, the good kind, with homemade sauce and shaved Parmesan, not the quick Jared stuff. She lit candles, poured red wine, smiled across the table like nothing was changing. But something had. I didn't realize it yet, but her touches became just a little too soft. Her eyes too calculating. And her phone. It buzzed twice under the table that evening, and she didn't even flinch. Just let it hum, unread. If only I'd asked. If only I'd looked. Instead, I raised my glass and toasted. "To getting through the storm," I said. She smiled. But didn't toast back. The next morning, she was gone. Not just out getting groceries. I mean gone. Her closet was empty. Jewelry boxes cleared. The safe where we kept documents and watches, unlocked and hollow. Even the framed photo of us on the Amalfi Coast was missing from the nightstand. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, barefoot, disoriented, heart pounding like it had just registered a blow to the chest. There was no note. No text. No explanation. Just silence. And a legal reality. She owned everything now. The house. The cars. The business. Every single asset I'd signed over in good faith. And I didn't even own the toothbrush I was holding in my hand. I called her. Voicemail. Texted. No reply. At first, I thought something had happened, a kidnapping, a car crash, anything that made sense. I even called hospitals. Nothing. It wasn't until 3 days later that I saw it. A photo online. Someone had tagged her in a vacation pic, sunlit, laughing, holding hands with someone I knew far too well. James. My former business partner. My best man at our wedding. The man I trusted enough to make COO during our company's expansion. And apparently, the men she'd been sleeping with. I stared at the image on my phone for an hour. Zoomed in. Zoomed out. Refreshed the page like the photo would change. But it didn't. It stayed the same. Amelia in a white linen dress. James in designer sunglasses. Smiling. Free. And me. I was still in our house, now technically her house, trying to figure out how someone can look you in the eye, kiss you on the cheek, and then rip your entire life out from under you without so much as a backwards glance. I wanted to scream. To break something. To erase time and undo my signature. But instead, I just sat down at the kitchen counter. The same place she'd signed the documents. The same place I believed she was mine. And I let the silence wash over me like cold rain. Because in that moment, something inside me shattered. And the worst part? I had no one to blame but myself. They say hindsight is 20/20. And now that I sit in an empty house that legally isn't even mine anymore, I see the signs, every single one, with brutal clarity. But back then, I called them stress. I called them mood swings. I called them everything but what they truly were, red flags waving right in front of my face. The truth is, Amelia had been slipping away from me long before she physically walked out the door. It started small. That's how betrayal always begins. Not with a bang, but with a shift so subtle you convince yourself it's nothing. A few years ago, she used to wait up for me. I'd come home late from meetings or business dinners, and there she'd be, curled on the couch in my hoodie, sleepy-eyed but smiling. We'd talk. Even if only for 10 minutes. Even if all I had the energy for was lying beside her, just listening to the rise and fall of her voice. But somewhere along the line, she stopped waiting up. First it was once or twice a week. Then most nights. I'd come home to a quiet house, no lights on, her side of the bed already cold. I told myself it was normal. People grow. Routines change. Marriage evolves. But then she started going out more. Girls' nights, she said. Book clubs. Spa weekends. Once, she told me she was flying to Napa with a friend I didn't know from college, a friend who conveniently didn't have an Instagram, or a last name she'd ever mentioned before. And I, the man who used to investigate potential business partners with surgical precision, didn't ask questions. Because asking meant I'd have to face what I already feared. That something wasn't right. One night, about 6 months before the fallout, we were supposed to have dinner together. Just the two of us. No phones, no work, just reconnecting. I left the office early, picked up her favorite Thai takeout, even bought the overpriced red wine she liked from that little boutique shop she'd dragged me to once. She never came home. At first, I thought something had happened. I called her. Straight to voicemail. I texted. Nothing. Then, at 11:43 p.m., a single message. Sorry, lost track of time. Stayed out with Mia. Don't wait up. Love you. Mia. We hadn't spoken to Mia in almost 2 years. I remember sitting on the couch with the pad thai getting cold beside me, staring at that message like it had been sent from a stranger. Something in the way she said, love you. It felt automatic. Like muscle memory, not affection. I should have said something. But I didn't. Amelia was always polished, effortlessly so. She knew how to smile in front of crowds, how to charm my business associates, how to dress for any occasion. But her talent wasn't just style. It was distraction. She could make you forget she hadn't answered a question. She could steer a conversation so smoothly, you'd never realize she'd dodged it. And I let myself be steered. Again and again. When I asked about the sudden weekend trips, she'd laugh, kiss my cheek, and say, you're just being paranoid. When I mentioned how distant she seemed, she'd sigh and blame work. Or hormones. Or the moon. And I, the man who used to negotiate million-dollar contracts, believed every excuse, because it was easier than accepting the truth. That she was pulling away. that she'd already found someone else. One night, just before everything came crashing down, I woke up and found her in the bathroom. The light was on, the door slightly ajar. She was sitting on the floor in one of my t-shirts, whispering into her phone. At first, I thought maybe something was wrong. A friend in trouble. A family emergency. But then I caught a word. Just one. Soon. It wasn't the word that hit me. It was how she said it. Like a promise. Like a lover's vow. I stood in the hallway for a long minute, frozen. I could have walked in. I could have asked. Demanded answers. But instead, I backed away. Pretended I'd never woken up. Because I was afraid. Afraid that hearing the truth out loud would tear something inside me that couldn't be stitched back together. The days that followed were filled with more silences than words. We stopped having dinner together. Our conversations became brief, functional, like co-workers in a shared office, not partners in a marriage. She started locking her phone. She changed passwords. She laughed less. Smiled less. And yet, she still put her hand in mine when we were in public. Still rested her head on my shoulder during the occasional movie night, as if to say, see. Everything's fine. Don't ruin it by looking too hard. I wanted to believe her. I wanted so desperately to believe that whatever was happening, it was just a phase. That maybe I'd neglected her too much while chasing deals and deadlines. That if I could just fix the business, get things back on track, we'd be okay. So when the financial collapse loomed, and the only option left was to move everything into her name, I didn't flinch. I saw it as a lifeboat. I didn't realize I was voluntarily jumping into the water while she stood safely on the deck, waving goodbye. The thing that still haunts me is how well she played the role. Even as everything decayed, she never broke character. She never screamed, never stormed out, never fought with me, not once. Because that would have made it too obvious. Instead, she gave me silence. Sweetness. Just enough warmth to keep me hoping. A con artist's touch. Only this wasn't a stranger. This was the woman I shared a life with. A bed. Dreams. And she'd studied me well enough to know exactly how much to give and how much to take. It wasn't until I saw that photo of her and James, her real lifeboat, that it all clicked. The late-night texts. The sudden trips. The avoidance. The quiet. She hadn't just fallen out of love with me. She had been planning her escape. And I, blind, trusting, foolish, had handed her the keys to everything while she kissed another man behind my back. The worst part? I don't even know when she stopped loving me. Or if she ever did. Was it 5 years ago? 2? Or had I always been the fallback plan, the safe bet she could rely on until someone more exciting came along? I still don't know. Maybe I never will. But I do know this. What breaks a man isn't always the betrayal itself. It's the knowledge that, deep down, he saw it coming. And did nothing. In the days following Amelia's disappearance, after the shock wore off just enough for my body to start functioning again, for my fingers to remember how to pour a glass of water, for my feet to remember how to carry me from the bed to the door and back again, I found myself falling into a strange kind of paralysis, the kind where the world keeps spinning around you, but you, stuck in the center, can't decide whether to scream, collapse, or simply close your eyes and let everything fade into the background, like static noise from a television that's lost its signal. And it wasn't just the betrayal that clawed at me, not just the fact that the woman I'd built my life around had ripped everything away with the calm precision of someone who'd rehearsed every step of her exit. No, what consumed me most was the doubt, a gnawing, relentless voice in my head that wouldn't shut up no matter how loud the silence in the house became, whispering questions I didn't have answers to, questions that burrowed into my chest like thorns I couldn't pull out. Was it all a lie? Did she ever love me? Was there even a single moment in the last 12 years that was real? I'd catch myself walking down the hallway and pausing beside framed photos, the kind people put up to remind themselves of joy, of togetherness, of shared life, and I'd stare into those frozen smiles, those laughing eyes, those moments once filled with warmth, and all I could see now was a performance, a mask she wore so effortlessly that even I, who knew her better than anyone, never thought to look beneath it. I started remembering conversations differently, like old film reels re-edited with new soundtracks, and suddenly what had once felt like love started sounding like manipulation, like perfectly placed words designed to disarm me, to keep me just content enough to not ask too many questions. And still, some nights, I'd dream of her, not the woman who left, but the woman I married, and I'd wake up reaching for her pillow before remembering it wasn't mine anymore, just like nothing else in this house was, and I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had ever truly been enough for her, or if I was just the man she settled for until something better, or richer, or bolder, came along. The hardest part was not knowing where the truth stopped and the lie began, because when you spend over a decade with someone, your identities become so tangled that even your memories feel compromised, and suddenly, you're questioning everything: the way she looked at you when you were sick, the vacations, the inside jokes, the way she used to dance barefoot in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. Was that real, or just another act in her carefully written script? I found myself replaying our past like a detective rewatching footage from a crime scene, pausing at every laugh, every glance, searching for inconsistencies, for cracks in the performance, for proof that what I felt wasn't just a figment of my own desperation. But the more I searched, the more confused I became, because for every memory that felt suspect, there was another that felt too raw, too intimate to be fake, and that contradiction tore at me, because how could a woman so capable of cold calculation still have held me the way she did when I lost my mother, still have cried against my chest when we thought we'd lose the house in 2017, still have looked me in the eyes on our 10th anniversary and said, "I'd choose you again, even if I knew how hard it would be"? Were those tears real? Was that pain hers, or just another part of the performance meant to keep me loyal, to keep me signing checks, to keep me too emotionally entangled to ever suspect that while I was holding on, she was planning her escape? And then there was James. His betrayal cut just as deep, if not deeper, because he knew me even longer than she did, knew every part of how I thought, how I trusted, how I gave loyalty like a fool expecting it to be returned in kind, and the fact that it was him, out of everyone, that she ran off with, made everything feel that much crueler, like a calculated final twist meant to humiliate me more than necessary. The man I confided in. The man I made COO. The man who once looked me in the eye at my wedding and said, "You've got something special here, Nate. Don't screw it up." Was he already screwing her then? Or did he just wait until the timing was right, until my guard was down, until my business was failing and I was too distracted by damage control to notice that my entire foundation was being eaten from the inside out? I started imagining their conversations, the secret ones I wasn't part of. Maybe they laughed at how easily I trusted them, maybe they shared wine in hotel rooms paid for with my money, maybe they celebrated the day I handed Amelia the final set of documents, high-fiving over the fact that I had, without even knowing it, signed the death warrant on my own empire. But then I'd spiral the other way, thinking maybe she hadn't planned to leave, maybe something changed along the way, maybe she fell in love with him after the fact and didn't know how to tell me, maybe she truly had loved me but life, or temptation, had simply broken her down. I hated those thoughts. Because they made me feel sorry for her. And that was the most dangerous emotion of all, sympathy, because once you start justifying the actions of someone who gutted you, you give them power again, you reopen the wound they carved, and they don't even have to be there to keep hurting you. Still, I couldn't stop wondering about when it started, how it started, if there were signs I missed that weren't even hidden, and I thought back to a dinner we had nearly a year ago, at that little Italian place in Santa Monica she always loved, when I caught her staring off during dessert, her fork paused in midair, and I'd asked, "Where'd you go just now?" and she'd blinked and smiled and said, "Just thinking how lucky I am." It felt genuine then. But now I can't help but wonder if what she really meant was, "I can't believe he still hasn't figured it out." And then there were the little things, the perfume I didn't recognize on her jacket once, the second phone charger she claimed was for the office, the shift in how she'd start checking the time when we were out together, like someone waiting for another schedule to resume, and all of it makes sense now, in a way that feels like punishment. It's like my entire relationship was a puzzle I thought I'd already solved, and now I realize I didn't even have the right picture on the box. I stopped answering calls. I ignored texts from old colleagues, from friends who didn't know what to say, from lawyers asking about next steps and financial evaluations, because none of that mattered, not yet, not while my brain was still stuck in a loop of memories that made me want to scream into the walls until they shattered just like my trust did. I started writing down questions in a journal. When did she stop being mine? What did she feel the first night they slept together? Did she cry when she left? Would she have left sooner if the business hadn't failed? And perhaps worst of all, if I had never lost the company, would she still be here? Because maybe the love she gave me wasn't unconditional, maybe it had an expiration date written in invisible ink, and once the money started running dry, so did her affection. Maybe I wasn't betrayed by her, but by the illusion of permanence. Because I believed in forever. And she believed in timing. There comes a moment in every man's life when the illusion shatters, not with the slow unraveling of suspicion, but with the brutal finality of confirmation, and that moment, for me, came on a Tuesday morning, just after sunrise, when I sat in the leather chair in my lawyer's office and heard the words that finally made it all real. Nate, it's all gone. Legally, she owns everything now. Your name isn't on a single asset. I should have felt rage, white-hot fury that makes you want to tear the world down around you, but instead, what washed over me was something far colder, a kind of numbness that crept up from my spine and settled in my chest like frost. It wasn't just the company. It wasn't just the cars or the house or the vacation property in Jackson Hole. It was the fact that I had signed it all away, not because I was careless, not because I was stupid, but because I had loved her. Because I had believed in her. I stared at the divorce papers, spread out on the table in front of me like a battlefield map, and beside them, tucked into a slim manila folder, were the private investigator's findings I hadn't even asked for, findings my lawyer had pursued on his own, maybe out of pity, or maybe because even he couldn't believe someone would vanish so cleanly without leaving a trail. And there it was. The truth. Photos of Amelia and James. Holding hands at the airport. Kissing outside a villa in Italy. Laughing over wine glasses in Santorini just 3 days after the transfer of ownership had gone through. She hadn't even waited a week. And James, my former best friend, my former partner, the man who toasted me at our 10-year company anniversary, was smiling like he'd won the lottery. Because, in a way, he had. My lottery. My life. My wife. I took the photos with me. I didn't say much as I left the office, just nodded vaguely at the receptionist, like a man going through the motions of a life that no longer fit. When I got home, if I could still call it home, since technically I didn't own it anymore, I sat at the edge of the bed and laid out the photos like playing cards, trying to match each image to a memory, each laugh to a lie, each kiss to a specific moment when I had been somewhere else, thinking she was mine. And then, just as the numbness began to crack, just as something inside me started to boil into something dangerous, my phone buzzed. It was a message. From her. Not a call. Not even a real explanation. Just a message. I hope one day you can forgive me. This isn't what I planned. But I had to do what was right for me. I stared at it for a long time. Right for her. What about what was right for me? For us. For the man who bent himself in half to keep the lights on when the company faltered, who drained his savings and sold his shares and sacrificed his pride just to keep them afloat. What about what was right for the man who trusted her enough to hand her his whole world? I called her. For the first time in weeks. And to my surprise, she answered. Amelia, I said, and my voice cracked in a way I hated, in a way that gave her too much power. I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. There was a pause. Silence, thick and uncomfortable. Then she said softly, you already know the truth, Nate. I want to hear it from you, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. Did you ever love me? Or was I just a step on your way to something better? She didn't answer at first. I could hear the wind in the background, waves maybe, which meant she was somewhere near the ocean, probably with him. I loved you, she said finally. I did. But somewhere along the way, I changed. We changed. No, I snapped, my voice rising. Don't say we. You changed. You lied. You planned this. You waited until I was too weak to fight back, and then you took everything. That's not we. That's you. She was quiet again. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, but it sounded hollow, rehearsed. But I couldn't keep pretending. I laughed, bitterly. You didn't want to pretend anymore, so you waited until you had the deed to my life before you walked out the door. That's not bravery, Amelia. That's cowardice. She exhaled sharply. You think this was easy for me? I was lonely, Nate. 4 years. You were always at work, always chasing something. I felt invisible. James saw me. He listened. He was my best friend, I cut in. And you were my wife. The weight of those words settled like lead in the space between us. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just let the silence say everything. She ended the call with a whisper. "I'm sorry." And then she was gone. Again. I sat there for hours after that, surrounded by evidence of a life that no longer existed, and for the first time in weeks, I cried, not angry tears, not desperate ones, but quiet, exhausted sobs that came from someplace too deep to reach. Because the truth wasn't just betrayal. It was finality. There was no fixing this. No talking it through. No coming back. She wasn't coming home. She didn't want to. And as much as it shattered me, I realized that what I missed most wasn't even her, it was the version of her I had carried in my heart for over a decade, the woman I believed in, the woman I would have given anything to protect. That woman never existed. She was a ghost stitched together from trust and hope and memory. And I had loved her more than I loved myself. That was my sin. By midnight, I packed a bag and left the house for good. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't write a note. I didn't even turn off the lights. Let her return one day, if she ever did, to see the shell of what she destroyed. Let James sit on the leather couch I picked out. Let him drink the wine I stocked. Let him sleep in the bed where I once dreamed of forever. I was done with pretending. Let them have the life they stole. Because I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. Not for them. Not for anyone. They say losing everything makes you stronger. That what doesn't kill you builds character. That rock bottom is where you finally find out who you really are. But what they don't tell you, what they never say out loud, is that rock bottom isn't a moment. It's a season. It doesn't hit you all at once and then move on. It lingers. It seeps into your bones, your breath, your mornings. It walks beside you in grocery store aisles and follows you into the shower. It's the silence in your phone, the ache behind your ribs when you remember you used to matter to someone. For the first few weeks after I left the house, I didn't stay anywhere permanent. I booked cheap hotels under fake names, just so I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I kept the curtains drawn and the television on low, not to watch it, but just to have some kind of noise, because silence had begun to feel like an enemy. And every morning I would wake up hoping, absurdly, that this had all been a bad dream. That Amelia would call and tell me it was all a test. That the house was still mine. That she still loved me. But she didn't. And she never would again. I learned something about grief during that time. Grief isn't just for death. You can grieve the living. You can mourn a marriage the same way you mourn a funeral. And the worst part is, there's no obituary for a betrayal. No one sends flowers. No one makes casseroles when your life falls apart because of a choice someone else made. I didn't tell anyone where I was, not my sister back in Chicago, not the board members I used to have lunch with, not even Mike, the only employee who stayed loyal after the company went under. I didn't want pity. I didn't want those looks that say, "You poor thing." I didn't want to hear, "You'll bounce back," from people who never watched the woman they loved walk out of their life with everything they'd ever built. Instead, I sat in motel rooms and stared at the wall. I watched the shadows move across cheap ceilings. I walked aimlessly through cities that didn't know me. And one day, when I hit a point so low I couldn't even find the energy to cry, I ended up sitting on a cold bench outside a laundromat in the rain, watching strangers carry baskets of clean clothes to cars while my own reflection stared back at me from the smeared glass window like a ghost I barely recognized. That was when I realized, I wasn't just grieving my marriage. I was grieving myself. The man I used to be. The man who wore custom suits and walked into boardrooms like he owned the air. The man who thought love could survive anything. The man who believed in loyalty like it was law. He was gone. And the man sitting there in wet jeans and an old hoodie. I didn't know who he was yet. But he was real. Stripped down. No money. No title. No illusions. Just pain. And the faintest flicker of something underneath it, something like survival. A week later, I found a small apartment in a part of the city I'd never lived in before. It was nothing like the homes I was used to, tiny kitchen, creaky floors, a view of a parking lot, but it was quiet, and most importantly, it was mine. No memories of her on the walls. No echoes of our arguments in the hallway. Just blank space I could fill however I wanted. The first thing I bought was a second-hand mattress. The second thing was a coffee maker. I couldn't afford much more than that, but somehow, that made it better. Starting small. Starting over. I got a job, nothing glamorous, just consulting work for a mid-size marketing firm that had no idea who I used to be. I didn't wear a suit. I didn't use my old connections. I just showed up, listened, offered what I knew, and left. It was honest. And in a strange way, it felt good. Like I was finally building something without pretending to be invincible. One afternoon, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, Rachel, an old college friend who used to bartend on weekends and laugh so loud it turned heads. She blinked when she saw me. "Nate," she said, tilting her head. "Wow. You look different." I forced a smile. "Yeah. Life'll do that." We talked for 20 minutes, and I didn't tell her the full story. Just enough. Lost the company. Lost the marriage. Starting over. She nodded and said something that stuck with me. "Maybe that's not the worst thing," she said. "Sometimes when the fire clears, you can actually see what matters." I didn't sleep much that night, thinking about that line. When the fire clears. Maybe that's what this was. Not destruction. Not punishment. But clearing. A painful, scorched earth rebirth. Maybe I'd been so wrapped up in success, in reputation, in status, that I'd lost sight of who I was beneath it all. Maybe Amelia had done me a favor. A cruel, merciless favor, but a favor all the same. Because in those dark hotel rooms, in that empty apartment, in the quiet hours between night and morning, I began to understand something I never did before. I had placed my entire identity in someone else's hands. And the moment she walked away, I disappeared. That's not love. That's dependency. And I would never make that mistake again. It wasn't some grand moment of realization. There was no dramatic turning point where I stood in the rain and screamed into the sky. Healing didn't look like a movie. It looked like me getting out of bed even when I didn't want to. It looked like cooking my own meals, badly at first, then better. It looked like returning one text from my sister, and then another. It looked like breathing through panic attacks and telling myself, "You're not broken. You're just bleeding." And bleeding stops. I started writing again. Just journals at first. Then short essays. One day, I wrote a letter to Amelia I never sent, and then another to James, filled with things I didn't even know I still carried. And somehow, the more I wrote, the more weight I let go of. I wasn't healed. But I was healing. And that was enough, for now. I don't know if karma is real. I don't know if James and Amelia ever think about me. Maybe they're still together. Maybe they fell apart the second the paperwork cleared. Maybe one day they'll regret what they did. But I've stopped waiting for that. Because waiting for someone else to hurt the way you did is just another kind of prison. And I've lived in one long enough. I used to think the hardest part of losing everything would be the fall, that dizzying plunge from a life of comfort into the unknown. But what no one tells you is that the real battle begins after the dust settles. Not in the crash, but in the silence afterward. That's when you hear the voice you've been running from. Your own voice. Asking quietly, "Now what?" It had been nearly 6 months since I left the house that was no longer mine. 6 months since Amelia disappeared with James. 6 months since I signed away everything because I thought love meant surrender. Now I knew better. Now, I was beginning to rebuild, not the company, not my old life, but myself. And oddly enough, it started with something small. A routine. Each morning, I made coffee. Always the same way. 2 scoops, filtered water, wait for the slow drip. It sounds like nothing, but for me, it was a kind of grounding. A ritual. A reminder that I was still here, still moving, even if the world didn't seem to notice. After that, I'd open my laptop and write. Sometimes only a few paragraphs, sometimes pages. The words poured out like old water from clogged pipes, rusty at first, but clearer over time. I wasn't writing for anyone but myself. No clients. No deadlines. Just truth. The kind I hadn't allowed myself to speak when I was trying to keep up appearances. I wrote about trust. About loneliness. About betrayal and survival, and how you can know someone for 15 years and still never really know what they're capable of. One night, on a whim, I posted one of those essays online. A small blog I'd created under a pen name, something simple, anonymous. I expected nothing. But then, the next day, I got a comment. Then another. Then an email. This is my story too. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for putting words to the pain. And something in me clicked. I wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, this pain wasn't pointless. Maybe it could be used. Transformed. I kept writing. And people kept reading. By the end of the second month, my blog had grown into a modest following. Nothing viral. Nothing massive. But real. Raw. Human. People shared their stories with me, men and women alike, all broken in different ways. Some had been betrayed. Others had done the betraying. Some were still living in the ashes. Others, like me, were crawling out. And that connection, that shared humanity, lit a fire in me I thought had gone out forever. For the first time in a long time, I had purpose again. Not power. Not wealth. Purpose. I started getting invitations to speak, small online panels, Zoom interviews, podcast guest spots. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to be the man defined by his pain. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who turned his personal collapse into content. But then I realized, I wasn't telling this story to relive it. I was telling it to release it. To give it shape. To make it useful. So I said yes. I spoke with honesty. No script. No sugarcoating. I talked about how easy it is to lose yourself in someone else's dream. How hard it is to admit you were wrong. And how, sometimes, the most brutal endings are also the most necessary beginnings. People responded. They didn't see me as a failure. They saw me as a mirror. And little by little, I began to see myself the same way. Not broken. Not ruined. Just human. It was around that time that I reconnected with Mike, the only one from my old company who never stopped checking in, even when I didn't answer. He'd been managing a tech startup out west, nothing flashy, but solid. He flew in one weekend and took me to dinner, and the first thing he said after we sat down was, "You look better." I smiled, surprised by how true that felt. I feel better. He nodded slowly. You always had vision, Nate. But now, you've got clarity too. I laughed. Well, nothing sharpens the soul like betrayal and bankruptcy. He raised his glass. To rock bottom. I raised mine too. To what comes after. Over dinner, he told me he was building something small but meaningful, tech with a social purpose. No more empty profits. No more chasing investors who only cared about the bottom line. He said he could use someone with my mind. I hesitated. I'm not sure I'm ready to jump back into that world, I said quietly. It's not that world, he said. It's something new. Built slow. Built right. And something in me stirred. I didn't say yes that night. But I didn't say no either. Later that week, I found myself walking along the waterfront alone. The air was sharp, early spring still clinging to the breeze, but the light was golden. It hit the buildings just right, made everything look softer, more forgiving. And as I stood there, watching the water ripple in the fading sun, I thought about how far I'd come. Not in miles. In understanding. I had once given away everything for a woman who didn't love me the way I thought she did. But I had gained something deeper. I had learned that trusting someone doesn't mean giving them the keys to your soul. That love without boundaries isn't romantic, it's dangerous. That forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It means choosing to no longer let it control you. And most of all, I had learned that healing isn't about returning to who you were. It's about becoming someone new. Someone wiser. Stronger. More whole. That night, I said yes to Mike. Not because I needed the money. Not because I missed the suits and boardrooms. But because I wanted to build something again. This time, not alone, but not dependent either. This time, with eyes wide open. And Amelia. I haven't heard from her since. Sometimes, I still think about her, wonder where she is, if she's happy, if she regrets it. But I don't wish her pain. Not anymore. I've made peace with the fact that some people are lessons, not lifelines. And she taught me the most important lesson of all. Never hand your worth to someone else and expect them to protect it. That's your job. And I'm finally ready to do mine. They say time heals everything. But I don't believe that anymore. Time doesn't heal. Time just makes room for healing, if you let it. If you're willing to sit with the silence, face the pain, peel away the layers of illusion and ego and regret until all you're left with is truth. Not a perfect truth, but an honest one. A year has passed since Amelia walked away with everything I thought I couldn't live without. A year since I watched the woman I trusted more than anyone else become the person I feared most. A year since I lost my home, my company, and, in many ways, the version of myself that existed only to be admired, respected, loved. Now, I live in a smaller apartment. My car is modest. My bank account, while recovering, doesn't scream success. But somehow, in this stripped-down life, I found more peace than I ever had when I was a millionaire sleeping beside a woman I didn't know was lying to me. Funny how clarity sometimes requires catastrophe. I used to replay the moment I handed Amelia those papers like a movie stuck on loop, the hesitation in my gut I ignored, the smile on her face that now feels sickeningly rehearsed, the silence in the room after she left. But the more I heal, the less I dwell on the betrayal itself, and the more I think about the man I was in that moment. A man who equated love with sacrifice. A man who believed that if you gave someone everything, they'd never leave. A man who didn't realize that trust isn't proven by how much you give, but by who the other person becomes when you do. I've stopped blaming her. Because the truth is, I saw signs. Not dramatic ones. Not red flags waving in the wind. But quiet, subtle shifts. A lack of eye contact during dinner. The way her smile became more polite than affectionate. The secrets she never said out loud. And I ignored them. Because facing them would have meant facing the possibility that love was dying. And I wasn't ready for that. So I clung harder. And in the end, I handed her everything, trying to hold on to something that was already gone. That's the part that hurts the most. Not that she left. Not that she betrayed me. But that I helped her do it. I think people expect some kind of revenge in stories like mine. They want to hear that she came crawling back. That I stood tall in a courtroom and took back what was mine. That James lost everything and Amelia ended up alone and bitter. But life doesn't always wrap itself up in poetic justice. Sometimes the people who hurt you walk away clean. And you're left to carry the debris. But here's what I've learned: revenge keeps you tethered to the past. Forgiveness, real, soul-level forgiveness, is the only thing that lets you move forward. Not because they deserve it. But because you do. Forgiving Amelia wasn't a moment. It wasn't a decision I made one morning over coffee. It was a slow, painful letting go. 1,000 tiny releases. Of the anger. Of the fantasy. Of the need to understand why. Now, when I think of her, I don't feel rage anymore. I don't even feel heartbreak. I feel distance. Like watching a ship disappear into the horizon. Like remembering a house you once lived in that no longer exists. A life that no longer fits. I still write. The blog has grown. People follow now not just for the pain, but for the hope. For the reminder that you can lose everything and still come back stronger. That being broken doesn't mean being ruined. I started doing speaking engagements in person. The first time I stood in front of a real audience, I felt the tremble in my chest, the same one I used to feel before pitching to investors. But this was different. This time, I wasn't selling a product. I was offering truth. And they responded. Not with applause, but with eyes that said, "Me too." After one talk, a man in his late 60s came up to me. Said his wife of 35 years had left him for her tennis coach. He smiled softly, eyes glassy, and said, "You made it make sense. Not what she did, but how I survived it." And I realized, this is what I was meant to do. Not build empires. But build meaning. Last month, I saw Amelia for the first time in over a year. It was unplanned. She walked into the same cafe I was in, different city, different coast, same bitter air of spring. She didn't see me at first. But I saw her. She looked tired. Her smile still had that practiced ease, but her eyes didn't match. And James wasn't with her. She caught my gaze eventually. There was a flicker of recognition. Then something else, something like regret. She walked over slowly. "Nate," she said, cautious, as if unsure whether I'd bite. "Amelia," I said simply. We talked for 3 minutes. She didn't apologize. I didn't ask her to. But before she left, she looked down at the coffee in her hands, then back at me and said, "I thought I was choosing freedom. But I think I just ran from myself." And for the first time, I saw the human in her again. Not the villain. Not the thief of my life. Just a woman who made a mistake she'd have to live with. And I nodded. "Me too," I said quietly. But I stopped running. She gave me a small smile, one filled with years, and walked away. And I didn't turn to watch her go. Because the chapter is closed. And this life, the one I've built from nothing but truth and scar tissue, is finally mine again. To anyone out there listening. If you've ever been blindsided, betrayed, shattered by someone you trusted. If you've ever stared at a closed door and wondered how you'll breathe again. Let me tell you something. You will. Not all at once. Not without nights that feel endless. Not without pain that comes in waves when you least expect it. But you'll breathe. And one day, you'll laugh again. Not because everything is fixed. But because you survived it. You'll learn that your worth was never in their hands. You'll stop waiting for closure that will never come. You'll stop rehearsing what you'd say if you had just 5 more minutes. Because the truth is, the person you become after the heartbreak is the real beginning. You're not the story of what they did to you. You're the story of what you did after. And if you let yourself, that story can be beautiful. It can be yours.